Hello everyone, my name is Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT13, and BT13 offers us lots of new and powerful tools to be able to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be the brand new iteration to MirageGaogamon. So MirageGaogamon really wants to try to take advantage of the opponent having a large hand size while actively trying to put cards into the opponent's hand to trigger some of our various own effects. Now with the brand new line in BT13, it really brings the deck home and makes it even more powerful than it ever has been before, with the new burst mode adding in a lot of extra combo potential. So with all that said and done, let's just dive right into the deck. Starting off with the Digitama, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Wanyamon. Wanyamon is still one of Blue's best draw engine Digitamas that's interacting with the fact that we want to be playing around with our tamers, so it just makes sense for us to want to utilize him. Next, when it comes to the level 3s, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gaomon. So this is the BT11 version of Gaomon, and this is going to be one of the deck's main digging tools for our tamer and our other Gao-based Digimon. Then, on top of that, his inheritable ability is pretty decent at trying to bounce low-level Digimon back to the opponent's hand, so that way we don't have to deal with them, while also filling up their hand size all at the same time. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Gaomon. So this is the brand new BT13 version of Gaomon, and this is another really decent card to try to help fill up not only just our hand, but the opponent's hand as well when we're being aggressive with this card. And on top of that, its inheritable ability is actually pretty decent at making sure we have some ways to be able to DP boost our Digimon to be able to hit specific numbers and clear specific threats. And then the last rookie of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Gaomon. This is the EX4 version of Gaomon, and this is another really decent card at just trying to help add cards back into the opponent's hand, so that way we could try to make sure that we can trigger our abilities as best as we possibly can, while also having a nice inheritable ability that's going to be gaining us memory when we're going to be filling up the opponent's hand by our card effects. Next, on to the champions, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Gaogamon. So out of all of the Gaogamons, because I am just running a straight up Gaogamon lineup, this is probably the worst one, and it's going to be a nice tech or flex spot, so you could really customize the deck depending on what you want and need and the tools that you want to be utilizing. This is the first one that I would cut for something else. But because it is a Gaomon, it does have some nice Gao-based synergies, and it's still a pretty decent card, having a nice when attacking ability to be able to gain memory when the opponent has enough cards in their hand, which could help with certain tempo plays and certain setups, on top of the fact that his inheritable ability, like we just saw with the BT11 version of Gaomon, also will help try to bounce the opponent's low-level Digimon back to their hand, filling up the opponent's hand the best that we can. But as far as the good Gaogamons, I'm going to be running 4 copies of the BT13 Gaogamon, just because he's going to help be the card to set up our Thomases when we don't have any, so that way we don't have to skip a beat on being able to play our tamer effectively. Then, on top of that, just like we saw with the BT13 Gaomon, it's also going to have a nice DP boost inheritable ability to make sure our Digimon is going to be as strong as it possibly can be. And then the last champion of the deck is going to be 4 copies of the EX4 version of Gaogamon. So just going up into this card, we already can start controlling the opponent's field and bounce their low-level Digimon back to their hand, which again is what we want to fill up their hand size while removing threats and bodies at the same time. Then on top of that, his inheritable ability, like we just saw with the EX4 version of Gaomon, also is going to help with our memory management and manipulation when we're bouncing cards back into the opponent's hand to fill up their hand size. Next, on to the level 5s, I'm going to be running 2 copies of MachGaogamon. So as far as the level 5s are concerned, I am going to be, again, running an all MachGaogamon lineup, and you can kind of tech them to how you want them to be, as long as you're just running the MachGaogamons for all of their inheritable abilities to be able to unsuspend in some way, shape, or form. I'm going to be running 2 copies of the BT11 version of MachGaogamon, just because he's going to add DP to our Digimon Digimon while also giving the Digimon blocker for some good defensive capabilities. But again, the inheritable abilities, what I really care about, having the ability to unsuspend is super nice and important at being able to make big aggressive push turns. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of MachGaogamon. So this is the BT13 version of MachGaogamon, and it has that same inheritable ability that we just saw with the BT11 one to be able to unsuspend this Digimon when cards are being added into the opponent's hand. The cool thing is all of these will trigger during all turns, so whether the opponent is doing it or whether we're doing it, it doesn't really matter. The unsuspend is just really good at just being aggressive or defensive, depending on the type of play and setup and situation you're put in. But I really do like what this MachGaogamon is doing, because he's one of the best, if not the best one to put in your raising area, because he doesn't have any when digivolving abilities that we would want, so we're always going to want to hide him in raising and take advantage of his when attacking ability to be able to turn off the opponent's ability to defend against our cards, as long as their hand is nice and full, which they should be if we're playing the deck correctly. And then the last ultimate of the deck is going to be 3 copies of MachGaogamon from EX4. So digivolving into this card allows us to bounce a level 4 or lower Digimon back into the opponent's hand, which is pretty good at some extra control if we need it. But again, we really do care about the inheritable ability. This one's a little bit different on how it's triggering the unsuspend, where it's just needing the opponent to have 8 more cards in their hand, rather than the opponent adding cards into their hand by card effects. So there is some slight differences on how you're going to want to utilize these cards, but they're all still really good at just having the ability to unsuspend our Digimon while being able to have different toolboxing potential with what our level 5s are doing, depending on the current board state that you would be facing off against. And then, as far as the level 6s go, I'm going to be running 4 copies of MirageGaogamon. So this is the BT11 version of MirageGaogamon, and it realistically is the only level 6 that we actually need because of how good this card is. So when we digivolve into this Digimon, we get to remove and bounce a level 5 Digimon or lower back into the opponent's hand, which we don't really want to do, but it's still filling up the opponent's hand and removing a threat. At worst, we would rather have the secondary ability go off, where if no Digimon was bounced by this effect, then we basically get to burn the opponent's security, except instead of going into the trash, it goes into their hand, again filling up their hand size while removing security at the same time, making it super ideal to line up with his secondary ability, which does trigger during all turns, both yours and the opponent's. So it's a really good offensively defensive ability for when cards are being added into the opponent's hand by card effects. Then we get a gain 1 memory for every 4, so the more cards they have in their hand, the more memory we're going to gain off of this card. And then the last level 6 of the deck is going to be 1 copy of MirageGaogamon from BT13. I did want to try to run more of this card, but I just found myself utilizing and wanting the BT11 version that much more. But this is still just a really good card and a pretty decent backup card as well, just because this has some built-in protections with the evade ability, and it's also doing something that isn't necessarily seen a whole lot in the game, and actually having tamer interaction, where it allows us to bounce one of the opponent's tamers, which could be absolutely huge and devastating depending on the deck that you're playing against. Just having some tamer removal is really, really decent. Then on top of that, his all turns ability is still pretty decent, where if we're adding cards to the opponent's hand by our card effect, then we get to play a Thomas from our hand for free. So again, it's just more setup for our Thomases to be able to potentially do more depending on the Thomases that we're going to be playing. And then when it comes to the level 7s, I'm going to be running 3 copies of MirageGaogamon Burst Mode. So MirageGaogamon Burst Mode adds so much combo potential to the deck just because of his special Digivolution condition of Burst Digivolving, where we need to have a MirageGaogamon on our field and return a Thomas from our field back into our hand to be able to Digivolve into this card for free. Yes, we basically do de-Digivolve it at the end of the turn, but that doesn't matter because of all of the pressure this card could put onto the opponent. So when we Digivolve into this card, we get to return one of the opponent's Digimon, regardless of level, back to the opponent's hand, and then every 4 cards they have in their hand, we're going to be gaining 1 memory. So if we use the Burst Digivolution to Digivolve into this card for free, we're just netting on memory for removing the opponent's threats. Then on top of that, he has a really powerful when attacking ability that is not once per turn, and we could abuse because it's not once per turn, and how this deck wants to set itself up, where if the opponent has 9 or more cards in their hand, then by returning cards from their hands to the bottom of their deck at random until they have 8 cards left, we get to unsuspend this Digimon. So that unsuspend ability is what we're really looking to gain off of this card, so that way we can line up a really powerful turn of multiple attacks to clear out the opponent's security and potentially win the game as best as we possibly can. And then when it comes to the tamers, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Thomas. So this is the BT4 version of Thomas, and he's a really good tamer, not only just because he's super cheap to play, but his on-play ability will help cycle through our deck, so he's replacing himself with some nice card draw, and on top of that, he's adding some extra aggression potential into the deck with his secondary ability that triggers during our main phase, where if the opponent has 8 or more cards in their hand, which they should based off of all of our bouncing abilities and effects to try to add cards to the opponent's hand, then we get to suspend this tamer to unsuspend one of our Gao named Digimon, so that way we can line up some even more levels of aggression with some extra unsuspends. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Nicolai. So even though Nicolai is not a Thomas, he's still, again, a really cheap tamer for us to play, and he does have some Gao-based synergies that we want to take advantage of, namely the fact that he's going to be giving our Gaos the jamming ability, so that way their swings into the opponent's security is going to be as safe as they possibly can be. Then, on top of that, he's also going to be helping with some of our memory generation for us literally doing what Gao wants to be doing and add cards into the opponent's hand. We get to suspend him to gain a memory when we do that during our turn. And then the last tamer of the deck is going to be 3 copies of the brand new BT13 Thomas. So this version of Thomas is going to be the deck's dedicated memory setter, so that way our memory is always going to start at 3 at the very least to make our plays as efficient as we possibly can make them. Then on top of that, he also has a nice secondary ability that's going to help add cards to the opponent's hand to be able to trigger some of our card effects depending on the current state of the game and where we are. It's still just a super helpful tamer to have, while also being another Thomas by name to take advantage of for this deck. And then when it comes to the options, I'm going to be running 2 copies of Full Moon Meteor Impact. So this is going to be the big, large removal option for the deck to try to clear out problematic threats we might not be able to deal with otherwise by just having a solid way at being able to return an opponent's Digimon, regardless of level, back to the opponent's hand, which is really good. So it's already basically like Kikaitis Breath, except it's better than Kikaitis Breath because we get to gain a memory for every 4 cards in the opponent's hand, so we can make this potentially cheaper than Kikaitis Breath, making it one of the best blue removal options that we currently have in the game, while also, again, filling up the opponent's hand to trigger a lot of our various other card effects, which could also help make this card even more efficient. Then, on top of that, its security ability is basically like its main, except we don't get the memory generation part, but we still get to bounce one of the opponent's Digimon back to their hand. And then the last option of the deck is going to be 2 copies of Blue Memory Boost. So Blue Memory Boost is still just a really solid generic digging tool just to try to make sure our deck can try to be as consistent as it can possibly be, while also gaining us some memory generation with its delay ability to try to make even more powerful plays possible. And then when it comes to the overall game plan and gameplay of the deck, it is just doing your stereotypical stack-based deck where you're going to try to hide your main Digimon in your raising area, pick it and put the best abilities that we possibly can in that raising area to protect it, and then move that Digimon out to Digivolve into our level 6 and start comboing off to close out the game from that point forward. So when it comes to the usage of our level 3s, I found that the best Digimon to use in raising is going to be the EX4 one, just because of that memory generation for when we go into our level 6 to be able to get a lot of extra memory, especially if we pair it up with the EX4 level 4 and the Nicolai tamer on top of its own ability. That's just a lot of memory we could potentially be adding and playing with to further extend and enhance our plays to be able to do more and have an easier time closing out the game with. The EX4 one also is good as an extra card in your hand for a combo extending play based on how we're going to be utilizing MirageGaogamon Burst Mode's ability. So this is just one of the best, if not the best, Gaomon in the entire deck. Then when it comes to the other two, if you don't necessarily have Nicolai, the BT13 one isn't necessarily bad. But when it comes to the one we want to hard play to try to start building up our second stack, that one is going to go to the BT11 one, just because it actually has an on-play ability we could try to gain some benefit from to try to help with the overall consistency of the deck. Then when it comes to the champions, a lot of that kind of just mirrors where the rookies are at, where again, the best one is going to be the EX4 one in raising, strictly for that memory generation when we go up into our level 6. The other two are pretty okay when we're building our stack, so that way we could try to set up our Thomas. If we need to control, we could control as well, or if we need to try to be aggressive, chip a little, and try to gain some memory to further extend our plays, then the BT11 one is really good, especially if we have an early Nicolai set up. Then when it comes to the level 5s, this is kind of where we start to have some extra flexibility. If our secondary stack lives long enough to be able to get into an extra level 5, I think that the EX4 one and BT11 one are going to be the best for that secondary stack. But if we're trying to build the most powerful main stack in our raising area and hide it, then that's going to go to the BT13 MachGaogamon as the best one in the raising area, because we're not losing out on any abilities, wasting any when digivolving abilities by it not triggering in the raising area. But it doesn't necessarily matter too much, considering all we're utilizing the MachGaogamons for is their inheritable ability to be able to unsuspend and get some extra attacks in. This is kind of where having our tamer setup is going to be super important. So once we're in this desired stack and we have at least one of each of our tamers set up on the field and our combo cards in hand, which is going to be our level 6 and our burst mode, we should be good to go to basically rip the opponent's security asunder. So we're going to want to raise out our Digimon. Then we're going to be able to swing with our MachGaogamon, the ability to have him not be redirected, so that way he's basically unblockable, is super important at being able to get damage through, especially if we have Nicolai to be able to give him jamming. Then this attack is going to end up being very safe. So we're already going to be able to check one security just from his attack alone. Then when we digivolve into our MirageGaogamon, that's going to allow us to go to one memory, bounce one of the opponent's mid to low level Digimon back into their hand, but if they don't have any, then we're just going to straight up basically burn another card in their security, and then he's going to unsuspend because we added a card to the opponent's hand by card effect, so that way we can make another attack with, while also gaining a lot of decent memory, because if the opponent has at least 8 cards in their hand, which they should, then we're going to be gaining borderline 2 memory. If we have the Gaogamon, then we're going to gain an extra memory, the Gaomon another memory, and with Nicolai, even more memory. So you could already start to see with all of that extra memory generation that we basically digivolve for free, or started netting some extra memory to make even more powerful plays possible. So from here, we're going to want to swing with our MirageGaogamon, then we're going to use Thomas to suspend him to basically unsuspend him, deal another point of damage onto the opponent, and then from this point, we're going to enter our burst mode by returning the Thomas that suspended himself to gain us an extra attack into our hand to digivolve into him for free. Then we're going to bounce one of the opponent's Digimon and start gaining some extra memory. So if they still have 9 cards in their hands, let's just say, then we're going to gain an extra 2 memory, so we could start to doing lots of powerful things with. So when we swing with this card, we're going to start picking apart the opponent's hand until they're going back down into 8 memory. Then we're going to unsuspend them because of that ability, dealing another point of damage. With all of this extra memory, that's where we could start hard playing some cards like another Thomas to be able to swing, use the Thomas's effect to unsuspend, and be able to get an extra attack if we added more cards to their hands that way through various other means by utilizing our Thomas when our MirageGaogamon Burst Mode is swinging with them having 8 cards in their hand. So that way we could use Thomas to put them to 9. That allows us to use MirageGaogamon's when attacking ability again to get another unsuspend. Then we could use the same type of sentiment by swinging, dealing another damage, and figuring out a way to unsuspend with some of the other cards that also will allow us to add cards into the opponent's hand, like the BT13 Gaomon or even the EX4 Gaomon's on play ability. So we have a ton of different ways to be able to chip onto the opponent and start aggressing and ripping their hand apart, on top of ripping their security apart for utilizing this type of a combo play. And then if you want a pretty decent starting point, Bandai over on their website does have a base build for you to go off of, so you could use that in comparison to mine to try to gauge as much information on the deck as you possibly can. They do have some decent write-ups on their interpretation on what's making the deck super good and super powerful, on top of a couple of staples that they listed to just help you with some ideas on how to approach this style of deck, along with their recommended deck composition, so you could start inferring and figuring out what cards you want to use in combination with each other to try to have as much impact as you possibly can, with a nice little strategy write-up outside of the information that I've been giving you. Outside of all of that information, there's still just a lot of decent tech and tools we could think about incorporating into the deck, all depending on what you have access to, the expected meta you're playing against, and the type of abilities you're trying to prioritize when approaching this style of deck. So if you want to try to take the approach on gaining memory for playing your tamers because we want to play our tamers, then we do have the BT11 Vmon as a good way to be able to generate some extra memory for doing so, while also being a good card to try to dig out our tamers as well. Then we do have some rookie floodgates in the form of Syakumon and Madoki Betamon to both try to stall the opponent and slow them down depending on the type of deck that they're playing. One is obviously going to be a little bit better and more impactful than the other, but that's more of a meta call and a meta read. Then we do have some other really decent rookies to help us generate some extra memory. There is the EX1 Vmon that's interacting with Unsuspend. Then we have Labramon, which is interacting with jamming. So we have alternative ways to still be able to gain some extra memory to make even more powerful plays possible, while still having some other generically good rookies that we could be playing around with, like the Security Blukomon, not only just for another security Digimon, but also helps with our card draw, so we could make our deck even more consistent, especially if we're running some off-package cards. Then speaking of some off-package cards when it comes to the level 4s, I do think if you're going to be teching a 2 of an off card, then a hybrid is a really good direction for you to go into. We do have some pretty decent hybrid selections for us to choose from, and they do have some extra utility outside of just digivolving on top of a tamer to try to swing for an extra attack out of nowhere. And the second best one that I would probably recommend is going to be the EX2 Leomon, just because he could add some extra defense, extra memory generation, and extra card draw all in one card. Then when it comes to some off-brand level 5s, we do have the EX1 Weregarurumon, just for some added card draw and the potential to gain some extra memory when we're being aggressive with our high-level Digimon and our hand is nice and full, which it should be if you're playing blue correctly. Then we do have the BT4 MirageGaogamon. If you want to just run a MirageGaogamon to digivolve and gain some memory for the opponent having lots of cards in their hand, the unblockable effect sometimes could matter. It's not as good as the BT13 MachGao, but it still can come in handy even though he is susceptible to redirects. Then blue just has a slew of really good options for us to run, like Ice Wall and Hammer Spark as just generally good utility cards on top of some other removal or stall based cards like Sorai with stripping and stunning the opponent's Digimon, and we even have a tamer that could help facilitate that while also generating us some extra memory at the same time. Then we do have some plugins and other utility cards we could think about splashing into the deck to try to either deal more damage or help with its overall utility, on top of the fact that we do have some other generically decent tamers for us to run like Matt and Sora that is interacting with how the deck wants to play and its themes and mechanics. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.